The wind over the red sands of Viridian 5 didn't howl like Earth's winter storms. It shimmered, thin and hollow, like breath on cold glass. The sky above was broken into two halves, one glowing teal from the gas giant that dominated the upper heavens, the other drowned in the pitch-black silence of space. At the edge of a half-collapsed transport pod, wedged in a cracked ravine, something small stirred beneath torn emergency netting. Her skin was the color of dusk, a lavender-gray sheen that shimmered softly like moonlit silk. Her eyes, far too large for her thin face, blinked without tears, glassy and full of questions, one word trembling from chapped lips as her tiny fingers reached toward the armored human who stood silently nearby. Love? Commander Ray Haldim had seen many things during her 20-year military commission across 5 systems. She had witnessed the collapse of colonies, the aftermath of orbital bombardments, and the haunted stares of survivors too shocked to speak. But nothing in her long career prepared her for that voice. The child couldn't be more than 8 cycles old, if her species even aged like humans did. Her limbs were too thin, wrapped in a tattered rescue wrap, and her cheeks sunken from dehydration. Her eyes had no business being so hopeful. They were surrounded by corpses of her kind, limp and twisted in the shattered wreckage. The emergency beacon had been faint, barely enough to guide Ray's scout craft here, but someone had sent it. And now, here she was, cradled in chaos and fire, asking the one question Ray had never answered for herself. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle. The child. The alien's irises rippled, shifting colors like oil in water. "Can you understand me?" Ray asked, her voice rasping through the external mic. The translator pinged, but no response came, only the repeated question from the child. More. Softly now, almost pleading. Love? It wasn't a question of language. It wasn't about translation. It was something deeper. Something primal. Something that reached across genetics and neural pathways, past DNA, and into the realm of the soul. Ray didn't know how she knew this, but she did. That single word was not a query. It was a cry for survival. A need to anchor herself in something safe, something gentle, something human dot above them. The planet groaned, a seismic tremor rippling across the plains, threatening to collapse the ravine further. Ray cursed and tapped her comm. No response, too much interference. The crash had created a gravity anomaly, and her ship's AI had warned that any extended stay risked entrapment. But the girl Mel, the child, couldn't be left behind. Ray moved closer and extended her arms, slowly, palm up. "It's okay," she whispered, though she knew the child wouldn't understand the words. "I've got you." The girl flinched, but didn't run. Instead, she tilted her head, watching Ray with a gaze that felt older than time. Her small hands reached out, brushing Ray's glove, fingers trembling not from fear, but from relief, as if she had waited lifetimes for someone to come. Ray scooped her up gently, shocked by how light she was, how frail. The girl leaned her head into Ray's chest plate, and with a shuddering breath, whispered again so faintly it could have been the wind, "Love ... dot dot dot." Something tightened in Ray's chest, an ache she hadn't felt since the day her own daughter died in orbit. The memory struck like a blade, her baby's face through the glass, screaming in silence as the fire took the ship. She had been too far away to reach her. In time. That guilt had carved tunnels inside her heart, hollowed her into a soldier that never allowed herself to feel again. But now, in the shadow of alien wreckage and death, a different child was calling her back to life, not through duty, not through orders, but through a single, soul-splitting question. A flare shot upward from the edge of the ravine, her drone, returning with power cells she had scavenged earlier. The timer blinked red. The gravity collapse would reach the zone in 9 minutes. Ray turned, adjusting her grip on the child. No time to think. No time to analyze. She moved fast, her boots pounding against unstable rock, dodging fallen beams, weaving between scorched bodies. The child held her tighter with each tremor. Ray's heart pounded louder than the tremors now. Not from fear, but from something she thought she'd buried with her daughter, a need to protect, to give without return, to love without understanding. They reached the extraction point just as the ground cracked behind them, swallowing the transport pod whole. Ray looked back once, feeling the echo of death behind her and the fragile, living question in her arms. The girl was silent now, eyes closed, her small form pressed into Ray's armor. The only sound was Ray's own heartbeat and a word that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Love? Asterisk, the medbay lights aboard the Valkyrie horizon were a harsh, sterile white, designed to keep soldiers alert and conscious in the aftermath of trauma. but they felt far too bright for the child curled under a thermal blanket, her alien skin dimming slightly with each passing hour. Ray sat beside her, armor peeled off and stacked in the corner, blood still crusted in the creases of her hands. The child hadn't spoken again, not even that one trembling word, but her eyes never left Ray's face. There was no translation algorithm needed anymore. Every glance from the child screamed one unspoken truth. She had chosen Ray. Dr. Monroe had objected at first. We don't know what she is. She could be dangerous, infected hell, even a spy. The wreckage was from an unauthorized vessel, unregistered. You should have reported it first, Ray. But Ray had simply walked past him, the child limp in her arms, her eyes wide and unblinking. You weren't there, she had said, and the finality in her voice had shut the room into silence. Monroe hadn't brought it up again. Ray sat now, brushing dried debris from the child's fragile fingers, unsure if the silence between them was peace or fear. Her name, Ray had discovered, was impossible to pronounce. But the girl had tapped her chest once, closed her eyes, and Ray felt it a name not in sound, but sensation. A pulse like sorrow wrapped in warmth. Ray called her Aya. It wasn't. Right, not exactly, but the child had smiled. And that was enough. What do you need from me? Ray asked aloud, not expecting an answer. Her voice cracked anyway, and she hated that. Soldiers weren't supposed to feel like this. They weren't supposed to cradle wounded alien children as if doing so would fill the void their own losses had carved. But here she was, staring into the eyes of a creature not even classified by Galactic Command, feeling something soft bloom. In her chest like spring in a bomb crater, Aya stirred. Her body was failing, too malnourished for rapid recovery. Monroe had said they didn't have the correct antigens, no way to synthesize medicine her body wouldn't reject. She needs her own kind, he said, if there are any left. Ray remembered the corpses in the wreck. She remembered the silence, the absence of any adult heartbeat in the wreckage. There were no others. The child was alone, utterly so. Ray responded the only way she knew how. She stayed. Not out of strategy, not because of orders. She just sat with her through the nights when the child whimpered in dreams of fire and rupture, through the quiet hours when her breathing slowed like she was trying not to exist too loudly. Ray began speaking not about war or duty or species, but about Earth. Her daughter's laughter when she first touched snow. The way sunlight used to break through the clouds over the Yukon outpost. The sound of waves, of birds, of music. Aya listened, her eyes reflecting the images Ray painted with words. Sometimes she'd reach out, touching Ray's lips when a new sound emerged, trying to understand not the words, but the emotion beneath them. When Ray said family, Aya tilted her head, confused. When Ray said home, Aya blinked slowly, as if trying to imagine something impossible. But when Ray whispered love, something in Aya's chest fluttered literally. Her ribbed sternum pulsed with a pale glow, faint but unmistakable, a response. Ray leaned in and repeated the word, slower this time. Love, Aya mimicked. The sound, faltering but clear. Her first real word since the crash. Ray smiled despite the ache in her chest. It wasn't just mimicry. It was a question answered. It was a bond acknowledged. But not everyone on the Valkyrie horizon shared Ray's belief. Whispers spread through the crew. Some were afraid of infection, infiltration, of weakness. Others were colder, clinical. Why keep her alive? They muttered, she's not ours. She's not even sentient, not really. But Ray remembered the warmth of her tiny hand, the light in her eyes as she echoed that sacred word. She was sentient, she was something more. Something aching to connect. Admiral Rezik was arriving within the next 48 hours. Protocol demanded the child be turned over for transport to an off-world facility, one where Ray knew she'd be dissected in spirit, if not in body. There were no rights for her kind, no representation, no treaty. Just a blank file and clinical curiosity. Ray stood from the medbay chair, fury and protectiveness rising inside her like fire through steel. She looked down at Aya, who now slept. Curled on her side, her fingers wrapped around Ray's abandoned ID badge as though it were a sacred relic. Ray had made her decision, though the shape of it terrified her. She would not let Aya disappear, not into a lab, not into silence. Not again. For the first time in a long while, Ray felt something dangerous settle into her bones, not anger, not sorrow, but purpose. And wrapped in that purpose, the child's voice echoed in her memory like a prayer. Love? The days passed like whispered promises, soft, uncertain, fragile. Ray began waking each morning before the ship's lights flickered on, sitting in silence by the medbay's viewport while the stars drifted like ghosts outside. Aya would wake shortly after, stretching like a fragile vine, her motion still slow from healing. She no longer cried out in sleep. Instead, she would find Ray and simply rest her forehead against her side, like a lost child checking if the world was still there. There were no common words between them, but their connection deepened beyond the reach of language. Ray had stopped using the translator, distorted Aya's voice into a cold approximation, stealing the beauty from its music. Instead, they communicated through small things: touch, eyes, sounds. When Ray handed Aya a protein wafer, the child broke it in half and offered Ray the larger piece. When Ray showed her a hologram of an earth forest, Aya pointed to the trees and pressed a finger to her own chest, then to Ray's, then back to the tree's 3 beats. One rhythm, like saying this is a stot. Ray began journaling in voice logs again, something she hadn't done since her daughter's death. Not for the brass. Not for the record. Just for herself. She spoke of Aya, but also of herself, her failures, her scars, her exhaustion. She told stories she never shared with anyone else. About how she once let a man die on a battlefield because she couldn't pull the trigger fast enough. About how her own husband left her after their daughter's death because she had grown too quiet, too hollow. And slowly, gently, she felt the hollowness lessen, as if Aya's presence was filling those empty rooms inside her with light and questions, instead of silence. One afternoon, Ray found Aya standing on her bunk, reaching up to the ceiling vents. Her tiny hands were twisting pieces of scrap metal from old repair drones into delicate spirals. Ray watched as the child formed them into small shapes, almost like the flowering fronds of coral reefs. "What are you making?" she asked softly, even though she knew Aya couldn't answer. But Aya turned, holding up the sculpture like an offering, her pale eyes gleaming. She tapped it once, and it let out a soft chime, the tone delicate and beautiful. Then, pressing it into Ray's hands, Aya whispered one of the few words she knew in human language now: memory. Ray felt tears she hadn't shed in years rise without warning. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Yes, a memory." They began creating them together, little things. Ray taught Aya how to draw using digital pens, and Aya drew galaxies with stars made of fingerprints. Ray hummed lullabies from Earth, and Aya mimicked them in harmonics that shimmered down her skin like bioluminescent waves. They built their own private language of signs, tapping rhythms and symbols onto the walls of Ray's quarters when words failed. Aya tapped twice when she wanted Ray to come close. Ray tapped once when she needed Aya to trust her. They began ending each evening by tracing spirals onto each other's palms, an unspoken ritual neither fully understood, but both needed. The ship's crew remained distant, some even hostile, but Ray didn't care. Aya was not a threat. She was the most vulnerable being Ray had ever encountered and the strongest. To survive alone after the crash, to reach out to a stranger with the word love in her mouth. That was strength Ray could never hope to match. But with each day of peace, a growing weight pressed on Ray's chest. She knew what was coming. Admiral Resik was en route. And the moment he arrived, everything would change. The ship would no longer be hers. Her decisions would no longer matter. And Aya, this small soul Ray had begun to see as family, would be taken, studied, locked away, perhaps even killed under the guise of protocol. She began making plans, quietly, carefully. She pulled favors, rerouted maintenance logs, studied shuttle dock rotations. And all the while, Aya watched her, saying nothing but understanding everything. One evening, as Ray tucked her under the blanket of spare cloth she had made into a nest, Aya touched Ray's face and whispered again, "Love?" This time, Ray didn't just nod. She pressed her forehead against the child's and said, "Yes, little one, yes, and I will prove it." And though the words were simple, the promise inside them was vast and terrifying. Ray wasn't just choosing to love. She was choosing to fight for it. Even if it cost her everything. The Valkyrie horizon drifted above a nameless moon, its hull reflecting cold silver under a pale star. Inside, the ship's pulse was changing. The crew moved like shadows under tight lips and nervous glances. The word had come through at 030 hours. Admiral Rizik's arrival had been accelerated. Less than 12 hours remained. Ray felt the pressure rising in her throat, thick and choking, like a wave she could no longer outswim. But what she hadn't known, what no one had known, was that Aya had secrets too. And they were no longer staying hidden. It started subtly. The ship's environmental systems flickered. Lights dimmed for half seconds longer than they should have. Gravity swayed during sleep cycles. Ray had dismissed it as maintenance backlog, stretched systems from long patrol weeks. But then Monroe's logs were corrupted. Entire sensor arrays began reporting false positive shadows where nothing should be, whispers on unused comm channels. And still, the child said nothing. One night, long past curfew, Ray awoke to find Aya standing barefoot on the cold deck, eyes glowing faintly. In the dark, her fingers were outstretched toward the terminal floating above it, never touching, yet the screen scrolled as if guided by invisible hands. Ray didn't speak. She simply stepped forward and knelt, watching. The room felt charged, electric, and solemn, as though a sacred thread had been pulled between two unseen worlds. Aya noticed her then. She lowered her hand slowly, eyes wide, shimmering with something Ray hadn't seen before. Fear, not the trembling kind. The ancient kind. The kind passed down in blood memory. Ray rose gently, reached out, and asked, "What are you, Aya?" The child didn't answer, but she reached to Ray's chest again, pressed her palm to Ray's heart, and then to her own. A rhythm passed between them. Ray's translator, long and active, hummed back to life as Aya whispered not in Ray's language, but something deeper, older, interlaced with resonance and light. The device struggled to interpret, blinking wildly before settling on word. Weapon. Ray's heart stopped. The word echoed like gunfire in a cathedral. She tried to keep her voice calm, but it cracked anyway. You were built?" Aya nodded once, slowly, her face tightening not in guilt but sorrow. Ray sat down hard, the floor cold against her spine. "Built for what?" The child reached into the blanket she always carried, and from it drew a broken piece of alloy. Ray had seen one like it before in the wreckage. Only this one pulsed with inner light, faint veins of circuitry flickering through the metal like veins. She placed it in Ray's palm, then gently touched it, activating a small projection. A data fragment, fragmented but vivid dot images, flared to fleet, dark and vast, blotting stars like a moving plague. Alien voices barked over unknown frequencies. And then Aya, in a pod alone, detached from a hive of identical children. Not passengers, not refugees, weapons, but not in the way Ray had imagined. They weren't bombs or drones. They were empathic keys, each one able to attune to the emotional frequencies of a sentient being and amplify them. Pain could become madness. Anger could become genocide. But love could shut down systems, could undo programming, could awaken something forgotten. The last piece of the projection showed one of Aya's kind older, train turning on her own creators, stopping an entire orbital cannon network by embracing a human officer who had refused to fight, and then silence. A void of data. Cut off, Ray stared at the child, who now sat beside her, quiet, trembling not with power, but with the terrible truth of what she carried. "They used you," Ray whispered, throat tight. "You were made to twist feelings, to end wars by breaking minds." Aya looked up, blinking slowly. She nodded again, but then she reached out and tapped Ray's chest again. The translator chirped, "But you feel and I choose." Ray understood. That was the difference. Aya had chosen love. She had chosen not to be what she was made for, just like Ray had once chosen not to pull the trigger on a surrendering enemy. And in that moment, Ray realized something larger. This child was not just a refugee or a weapon. She was a test, a final thread left behind by a race who had destroyed themselves with their own designs. A thread only humans empathetic, irrational, fiercely loyal humans could decide how to hold. And the question returned, sharper now, trembling like a blade. What would happen when Rezik arrived and found a living prototype of a psychic weapon that responded to love? What would happen if others decided to use her again? Ray stood slowly, the alloy piece still glowing in her palm. She looked down at the child, at the one soul she trusted more than anyone on the ship, and whispered, "Then we'll have to make our own ending, not theirs." The engines of the Valkyrie Horizon vibrated with a dull hum that ran like a heartbeat through the walls. But Ray heard only the countdown. 7 hours until Admiral Rezik's arrival. 7 hours before the child would be taken from her, caged, and labeled and dissected not for her flesh, but for the thing inside her heart that someone, somewhere, would find a way to weaponize. The data fragment burned in Ray's memory like a brand. And now that she knew, she saw it in everything, in the way Aya's eyes followed her with absolute trust, in the way the ship's system subtly shifted when Aya was upset or afraid. It wasn't just empathy, it was power. A power humans weren't ready to handle. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She stood alone now in the tactical operations bay, staring at a route she'd drawn on a classified console she wasn't supposed to access. It was a flight path out of regulated space, beyond jurisdiction, into the demilitarized fringe. There were rumors of a forgotten station out there, a hollow asteroid no one claimed. No support, no protection, but maybe freedom. Maybe safety. The only way off the ship without triggering containment lockdown would be through Day 12, a maintenance airlock rarely used since the last resupply. Ray had just enough rank left to override the logs and scramble the launch signature. But she had to move before Isaac docked. Once he was on board, the ship would be sealed. Every corridor, every hangar, every breath. Watched. Monroe cornered her in the mess hall as she filled a ration tray for Aya. "You've been avoiding me," he said, voice low. His eyes flicked around, sharp and knowing. "You've seen the logs, haven't you? The power surges. The signal anomalies." "She's causing them," Ray didn't answer. She simply placed the ration pack on the tray and turned. "She's dangerous, Ray," he hissed, following her. "Not just because of what she can do, but because of what she is." Rezik's bringing a team. Extraction specialists. No one survives extraction, Ray. You know that? She stopped then, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "She's a child. She's a weapon." His voice softened. "But maybe she doesn't have to be. If we study her properly, if we isolate the connection." Ray turned slowly, her voice ice. "Isolate it? You mean tear it out?" "Of her. Rip out the part that makes her care, that makes her want to connect. That's not science. That's erasure." Monroe looked away. "Don't follow me again," she said, and walked out. Aya sat cross-legged in Ray's quarters, waiting. She hadn't asked questions, hadn't made a sound, but Ray could feel her fear like a scent in the air. When Ray entered, Aya looked up, her eyes wide, and whispered, "You leave?" Ray knelt and held the child close. "Not without you." Aya's small arms wrapped around her, trembling, and then, for the first time, Ray felt it, truly felt. A pulse through her spine, a ripple through her chest, like a second heartbeat. Her emotions were being mirrored, reflected, amplified, not just shared, but magnified back into her. It was overwhelming. The love, the fear, the ache like holding a son in her arms and knowing it could either worm or burn her alive. She pulled back, breathless, realizing what it meant. This was the source, the key. Aya didn't just feel emotions. She became them. And in proximity, Ray was becoming part of that cycle. The bond between them had reached a threshold. If they were separated now, if Aya was taken, she might fracture, she might react. And what would happen then? Ray activated the secure locker. Hidden beneath her bunk, inside a civilian-grade flight suit. No insignia, no rank. She began packing rations, med supplies, cloaking tags. There was no going back. She looked at Aya, now watching her with calm, steady eyes. "Do you trust me?" Ray asked. Aya tilted her head. Yes, the word wasn't just spoken, it resonated. Ray felt it through her bones, not she should have felt strong, resolute, but instead, she felt guilt. Because escaping meant betraying everything she had sworn to uphold. Her duty, her oath, her shipmates. It meant going rogue, becoming an outlaw, a traitor. And yet, when she looked at Aya, none of that mattered. Humanity wasn't defined by orders or protocol. It was defined by moments like this, when someone made a choice to protect, even at great personal cost. Not because it was safe, but because it was right. The console pinged. Rezik's ship had entered local space. Countdown. 3 hours. Ray tightened the straps on her gear and reached out. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "It's time to run." And behind her, alarms began to wail. Asterisk, the corridors of the Valkyrie horizon screamed with red light. Emergency klaxons blared as bulkheads sealed in rapid sequence, locking down sections of the ship like a giant closing. Its fists. Ray ran with Aya clutched against her chest, the child wrapped in thermal cloth and instinctive silence. The chaos around them rose like a storm automated lockdown protocols. Armed security scrambling, command overrides echoing through comms. The Admiral's shuttle had docked ahead of schedule. Ray had minutes, maybe less, before every path. Off the ship was sealed or swarming with Rezik's men. She skidded around a corner, slammed her fist into a security panel, and felt the override code burn her skin as the panel rejected her authority. "Damn it," she hissed, voice shaking. Her retinal scan no longer cleared the doors. The system had flagged her already. But she had a backup plan. She yanked a pulse flare from her belt and shoved it into the console's input socket. Sparks flew. The door slid open, sluggish and groaning. Aya's hand clutched her collar. "Scared," she whispered. "You hurt?" Ray paused only long enough to press her forehead against the child's. "Not if we make it. Not if you hold." On. They sprinted again. Her destination, Bay 12, was just one level down. A maintenance lift stood ahead, half-lit and barely functional. Ray forced it open with brute strength, her hands slick with sweat and blood from a scrape she hadn't noticed until now. Aya buried her face in Ray's shoulder as they descended in darkness. The landing bay was quiet, too quiet. A cold, metallic silence clung to the air like frost. Ray slid through the shadows, ducking behind stacked crates, her breathing shallow. Then footsteps, steady, heavy, approaching. "Commander Halden," came the voice, deep, calm, and humanly precise. "You are in direct violation of Article 7. Do not make this worse." Admiral Resik stepped into view, flanked by 2 armed officers in black combat suits. His eyes were cybernetic, gleaming beneath his polished cap. He did not raise his weapon. He didn't need to. His voice did the damage. "She is not yours," he said flatly. "She is not anyone's. She is a system anomaly. A bioengineered variable that could alter the course of galactic engagement if left unstudied. You know what she is." "You've seen it." Ray stepped forward, shielding Aya with her body. "I've seen what she could be if we let her." Resik tilted his head slightly. "And what will you do with her? Hide? Run from every outpost? Every patrol? Keep her in a cave? Somewhere singing lullabies while entire systems fall to conflict she could end with a single breath?" "She's not a weapon," Ray said through clenched teeth. "She's a child, and she's choosing not to be what they made her." "Choice is irrelevant," Resik replied. "The universe doesn't care what she wants. It only cares what she can do." Aya shifted in Ray's arms, and something changed in the air. The metal vibrated gently beneath their feet. Ray felt her own heartbeat slow, then quicken. Not from fear, but from something else. Aya was responding to the tension, to the threat. Ray felt it, an emotional feedback loop, beginning to rise. "No," she whispered, more to Aya than to Resik. "Don't, not like this." Resik noticed the change, his posture tightening. "You're already too close. She's sinking with you. If you die, she could collapse or retaliate. We cannot afford that risk." "She doesn't want to hurt anyone," Ray said, stepping back toward the emergency launch cradle. "But if you come closer, she will, because you're making her feel fear. And fear is a dangerous thing when it comes from someone who understands love." Resik raised his hand. "Take them." The soldiers moved. Ray acted without hesitation. She threw a flash charge to the ground and dove backward, shielding Aya with her body as the bay filled with light. The child whimpered, eyes glowing like bioluminescent ink. Ray knew the emotions were rising, magnifying. The soldiers stumbled, their minds fogging as the feedback loop affected their brains directly. One fell to his knees, hands over his head. The other dropped his rifle and backed away, his eyes wet with tears he didn't understand. Resik stood firm, but his voice cracked slightly. "This is what she does. She breaks men. She turns emotion into madness." "No," Ray said, crawling toward the shuttle cradle, fingers slamming the launch codes. "You do that. She just reflects what's already there." The bay doors opened, the vacuum shield activating with a hiss. The shuttle released from its cradle, engines primed. Ray placed Aya inside the cockpit and sealed the hatch. Resik raised a weapon. Ray stepped between them. "You'll die," he warned. "I already did," she said. "The day I let my daughter die alone. I won't let that happen again." Aya reached toward the glass. Her voice, soft but piercing, echoed into every system on the ship. "Love." And then silence. Resik lowered his weapon, his breath uneven. Something inside him cracked. Ray saw it, not a breakdown, not defeat, but the briefest flicker of understanding. The shuttle launched, disappearing into the stars, and Ray was left standing in the emptiness, her eyes closed, her heart full, her body trembling, but her purpose finally clear. The shuttle had long vanished into the black, a small comet of stolen hope streaking into the unknown. Ray stood alone in the launch bay, her body aching, her ears still ringing from the final clash of fear and love, of orders defied and truths. Laid bare, no one moved to arrest her, no one even spoke. The guards sat slumped against the walls, their weapons forgotten. Resik had left without a word. Not in surrender, but in silence, a silence Ray suspected was more dangerous than rage. She had not won, not truly. The system would come for her. For Aya, for the idea of them. But the moment had been enough. A breach in the armor of what the galaxy thought it understood. Ray was confined to quarters under quiet watch. No court-martial, no interrogation, just quiet. A pause, as if the entire ship didn't quite know what to do with her anymore. She no longer fit inside their machinery. They could label her a traitor, but it wouldn't stop the whisper that now moved among the crew. She did it for love. Some hated her for it. Some admired her, but none could look at her the same. And perhaps that, too, was part of the change Aya had left behind. Every night, Ray sat by the darkened viewport, her thoughts drifting to the stars. Somewhere, Aya was out there, hiding, growing, choosing. Ray didn't know if they'd ever see each other again. That thought used to hollow her out. But now, she understood something deeper. Aya didn't need Ray to survive anymore. She needed Ray to believe, and Ray did. With every fiber of her scarred heart, Monroe came to see her one night. He brought no data pads, no threats, only a simple message. "She left something for you." He handed Ray a scrap of cloth, her old uniform patch, carefully embroidered with spirals. A message in their shared language of hands and shapes. Ray traced it with her fingers, 3 spirals, intertwined, memory, family, love. She pressed the cloth to her chest and cried, not out of grief, but release. For the first time in years, her tears weren't for what had been lost, but for what had been given. Somewhere in deep space, a signal pulsed, quiet and small, a heartbeat tethered to no system, belonging to no command. It was not a call for help. It was not a beacon of war. It was simply a presence reaching into the void and saying, "I am still here," and somewhere across the stars, a child no longer afraid whispered into the dark, "Love." Not as a question, but as an answered dot in humanity, in all its flawed, stubborn beauty, had answered her back. Not with conquest, not with control, but with one wounded, defiant woman who had chosen to care when she could have turned away. That was how the universe changed. Not with battles. But with a heart broken open and still beating.